meeting to order. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 109 du comité permanent.
Welcome to meeting number 109 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, December 6th, 2023, the committee is resuming today its study of the federal government's use of technological tools capable of extracting personal data from mobile devices and computers.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room or remotely using the Zoom application. Again, as I always do, a reminder to all members to be mindful of your earpieces so that they don't cause feedback and damage to our interpreters. The interpreters today, by the way, are on a remote basis. I believe that all members were notified by the clerk of that yesterday. I'd now like to welcome our first witnesses for this first hour. We've got Minister Anita Anand, who is the President of the Treasury Board. Welcome, Minister. And with her from the Treasury Board Secretariat, we've got Dominic Rochon, Deputy Minister and Chief Information Officer of Canada. Minister Anand, I understand you do have opening remarks, and you're going to address them to the committee. You have up to 5 minutes to do so. Please start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the lands on which we are standing and gathered constitute unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. Et aussi, je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion.
I would like to thank you for the opportunity to highlight government's commitment to ensure the privacy protection of citizens.
Officer of the Government of Canada. Let me begin with this. Our government takes the privacy rights of Canadians and federal public servants extremely seriously, and it is one of our top priorities. Le gouvernement gère les fonds.
Government manages these funds using a series of policies and directives which are in consistence with our laws. As President of Treasury Board, I'm the person designated and in charge of enforcing the law on privacy protection and personal data protection, which outlines the requirements for privacy protection and data protection by federal institutions. This law equally grants individuals the right to access their personal information and data, which is detained by federal institutions, and to correct this data.
Implements policies, directives, and guidance to assist government institutions in meeting their obligations under this Act. However, it is important to note that heads of government institutions or their delegates are responsible for the proper implementation of the Act, as well as overseeing TBS's privacy policies within their institutions. One of these TBS policies is the Directive on Privacy Impact Assessment, which sets requirements for institutions to complete privacy impact assessments, or PIAs. A PIA is required when personal information is used for or intended to be used as part of a decision-making process that directly affects an individual. The directive requires that institutions undertake a PIA when implementing a new program or activity and when substantially modifying an existing program or activity. And that involves the creation, the collection, and the handling of personal information. Mr. Chair, it is important to note that the responsibility for privacy impact assessments rests with the institution responsible for the program. My
department commits to renew the confidentiality and privacy clauses, and we will have updates on the directive on assessing incidents on privacy. This update includes the commitment to rationalize evaluations on incidents of breaches of privacy and to seek out possibilities of improving this directive.
We've consulted with privacy experts on changes to the Directive on Privacy Impact Assessment and are engaging with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. We intend to publish the updated directive this summer. Heads of government institutions or their delegates are accountable for adhering to those rules that are set out in the Privacy Act and TBS privacy policies. Institutions will be best placed to provide context regarding the use of digital forensic tools in their respective environments. I am happy to be here alongside Mr. Rochon to discuss how TBS policy can be made more clear, streamlined, and easier to follow for those institutions on a day-to-day basis as we continue to respect the Privacy Act and privacy laws that are so important for the protection of personal information. With that, Mr. Chair, I will close my opening remarks and I'm open to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We're now going to start our 6-minute rounds, the first round for today. And for that, I'm going to go to Madame Kuzi. Ms. Kuzi, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Minister, to the Ethics Committee. This is, of course, our second day together in a row. Yesterday, in the Government Operations Committee, I expressed my disappointment in your handling of the public purse $40 billion deficit, the $500 million where that was indicated you would make the commitment to try and find how the majority of those funds are actually from lapsed funds and reserves, not actually new amounts of savings. And of course, the second edition of the managerial guidelines you put out yesterday, since clearly the managerial guidelines of October were not effective in the 6-month period. We didn't even have an opportunity to touch on your role then in the oversight of the privacy of information. There was so much to cover yesterday. Frankly, I shudder at the thought of having to take over your role if necessary because of the incredible amount of work to do. But let's talk about then the PIA compliance today. So when the news broke on the lack of privacy impact assessment compliance across 13 different federal departments and agencies, you stated that each federal institute, as you did today, is responsible for enforcing the laws and the policies. I feel that this ignores the responsibility of the Treasury Board to provide the oversight and to ensure departments are enforcing these policies. After more time for reflection, I was here previously making this point. Would you not agree that it's the responsibility of the President of the Treasury Board to ensure federal departments and agencies are protecting the privacy of your primary constituents, the public service?
The Privacy Commissioner has received no complaints relating to a violation of the Privacy Act. The Privacy Commissioner has engaged in no investigation and has stated that there was no breach of the law. The role of the Treasury Board is to promulgate rules and policies relating to the governing of the public service, and those rules need to be enforced by deputy heads. And that is what is continuing to happen. We play a coordinating role across government to ensure that they have what they need in terms of information relating to government policy.
Right. I believe that the term that the Commissioner used was that it was an insult, that this sentiment was felt. Throughout the testimony that we received from the departments accused of not following the Treasury Board privacy policies, we've received many different responses and a number of different responses. Some have stated they have the tools and are using them, but are now completing a privacy impact assessment. Others stated they completed a general PIA and that covered the tool, rather than specifically analyzing the security concerns of this invasive technology. Is it concerning to you that 13 departments using the same tool have completely different definitions of what compliance means when it comes to following the impact on the PIA?
So to be clear, as the designated minister under the Privacy Act, I'm responsible for the administration of the Act, but the deputy heads are responsible for implementing Treasury Board policies. And I am actually currently updating the directive on the privacy impact assessments. I will say that programs and activities require a PIA, not the forensic tools themselves. We have had a number of departments, in fact, a majority of those departments are conducting a PIA. We have reached out to them numerous times, as well as the Privacy Commissioner, and my CIO, Dominic Rochon, can add.
Thank you, Minister. I'll just add that indeed, with regard to the 13 departments in question here, we followed up with all 13 of them. there was a different setup with regard to the programs and activities in question. Most of them actually had PIAs. Then there's a question of whether or not they updated those PIAs at different moments in time when it was apparent that they took on new tools. And so we're getting that information, and I think out of the 13, 3 departments, for example, CRA, had a PIA for their activities, for their program, and had also flagged that they would be using forensic tools, so that was fully compliant. In other instances, the PIAs, there was a decision made that it did not require an update. There were a couple of departments there, Competition Bureau, CRTC, for example. And then in other cases, departments have said, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to actually update our PIA.
Thank you, Mr. Rochon, for that. Madam President, you say you're responsible for the administration of this, but not for, I just don't understand how this doesn't imply that you have complete responsibility and oversight as to ensuring, how can one have responsibility for the administration yet not have the responsibility to ensure that the proper documentation is completed for the protection of Canadians and their privacy? I'll try and get another question in briefly, Chair. I know my time is coming to an end. We've heard in this committee that mobile forensic devices, the forensic tools being used by numerous federal departments, are not necessarily spyware, but have the same capabilities and are provided by the same suppliers. Do you agree, Minister, that this technology is invasive and violates the privacy of public servants and Canadians it is used on?
I'm going to need a quick response.
There was no violation of the Privacy Act, and the Privacy Commissioner did not launch an investigation and received no complaints. There was no violation of the Privacy Act.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Thank you. Merci, Madame Cousy. Ms. Khalid, 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. Minister, when did you first find out about this issue, and what steps have you taken since then after learning about this issue to rectify it?
The issue relates to the use of PIAs relating to privacy law that departments are undertaking. A PIA is like a checklist, and it ensures that the protection of personal information of Canadians continues to occur on a department-by-department basis. So when I was first sworn in, of course, I received numerous briefings relating to my obligations as minister, and I will continue to make sure that Treasury Board policies are understood and distributed across government. It was the end of November when the article was released. Of course, I was briefed by my team at the time, and I will now ask Mr. Rochon if he could elaborate on the steps we took thereafter.
Thank you, Minister. Indeed, on December 4th is when the Privacy and Responsible Data Team, which is a team within the Office of the Chief Information Officer, followed up with all 13 organizations. We came up with a series of 6 questions. Obviously, the first question being, did your institution use these tools or software described in the article? Secondly, which personal information banks are associated with those programs or activities? Because a PIA is required on a program or an activity, not an actual tool. What are the legal authorities under which those programs or activities operate? We then asked whether or not the program area consulted their Section 10 delegate as to whether or not the Privacy Act was addressed to look at those tools. And we also asked some questions about the procurement of those tools as well.
I will just add, I don't know if it is clear, but there are statutory obligations to undertake investigations, in which case these forensic tools are required. But before they are actually used in the collection of any personal information, a warrant is required from a judicial standpoint. And so there is a very high threshold before these instruments are utilized. It is not taken lightly. Obviously, there are legal parameters that must be respected, the Privacy Act, as well as the governing legislation, as well as judicial authorization relating to a warrant. So the threshold is high.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Now, you spoke about privacy impact assessments in your opening remarks. Why are privacy impact assessments important, do you think?
So institutions are required to undertake a PIA for a program or activity in order to protect the privacy of Canadians. So when personal information is being used or it's intended to be used as part of a decision-making process that directly affects the individual, when there are modifications to existing programs or activities where personal information is intended to be used. And privacy impact assessments enable then the department and department heads to mitigate privacy risks. That is one of the advantages of the PIA. And I am going to revise the PIA directive. I'll be issuing it this summer, and I will be updating it to ensure that it will be well understood by all departments. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Now, the Privacy Act, are PIAs required, are departments required to provide PIAs based on the Privacy Act?
They are not, PIAs are not mandatory. There is, as I said, it's a checklist of items to make sure that Privacy Act considerations and the protection of individuals' personal information is paramount. And so it enables that assessment and risk analysis to occur. And as I said, because those investigations are required under statute, so for example, whether it is the CRA to prevent fraud or to investigate fraud, that's a prime example. These forensic tools can be useful, but they just can't be implemented without the legislative and judicial oversight.
And do you think that there should be a legislative oversight as to how PIAs are conducted within different departments?
I spoke with Minister Varani last night. I know that he is examining the Privacy Act as a whole from a Minister of Justice standpoint. We are updating our own directive, which is solely within the Treasury Board authority, and that is my realm. And so I want to make sure that those that checklist of items, that PIA, that risk analysis that will be done by departments will occur. Consultations are ongoing, and we need to make sure that we do this right. And so that is a systematic process. And as I said, I will come forward this summer with more to say on an updated directive. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. How much time do I have?
13 seconds.
Okay, well then. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. Minister, Monsieur Villemure, pour 6 minutes. Commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing this morning. I hope you can shed light on some gray areas. When you learned in December in the CBC radio article that there were no assessments, PIA assessments, were you surprised? It is important for me as a minister to be here to ensure oversight of the law and of all the laws under my department. But of course, when I heard this news, I had conversations with my department, with my team, and I know that the necessary steps were taken in order to reach out to the departments concerned. We didn't have all the facts from the beginning, but now we have a method in place to ensure that we're on the right course. Mr. Vachon, were you surprised? Surprised in the sense that, well, I was not in this position at the time, but from what I understand, the surprise was from the fact that it wasn't clear across departments what was required. There were supposed to be PIAs. So privacy impact assessments, and we had to have a number of programs and activities as part of this. And most government agencies and departments had this in place for their programs and activities. But knowing that by using these tools, they had to update their PIAs was the element. So this allows maybe room for interpretation, and that is where our directive leaves that leg room for the departments to have that interpretation. Hence the explanation from the minister that we are currently updating the directive. And what we will do is that we will put in place a directive that will explicitly explain that the new technological tools will require an updates of PIAs. Well, there was one of the departments which said there was a PIA that was as old as 2006, and that was probably prior to Twitter. And with new technological instruments and such a technological advancement, it would be surprising that this would not have impact on privacy. And I think this is a bit neglectful. I understand that there are a number of gray areas which you will clarify, and I agree with that. But in most cases, we saw some people who said, well, um, it didn't seem very important or was accessory. And I know that it is not obligatory. Madam President of Treasury Board says it is obligatory but not required. I mean, maybe there's a compliance issue to be clarified here. The obligation is to conduct an analysis to see what the impact is. Now, if you've already assessed the privacy factors under your program, it is already clear that you're going to conduct investigations, maybe relating to an individual, be it on the law, the act on border services or for fiscal purposes. I think it goes without saying that an assessment of privacy, the incident on privacy, will come into play. And the fact that we do this through interviews, that we go through your personal items, and that we use a tool which is more precise in order to go identify specific items of information. This does not mean that there will be an additional impact on you. Please allow me take an example that is out of this committee. We had someone from RCMP who told us that when we use a forensic tool like this one, at first we used to have microphones on the lamps, for instance, but now sometimes a microphone is not the same as the phone with which you sleep at night, but the potential violations are broader, right? Yes, I completely agree with you, and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that this would take an assessment, and in that example, I would say that assessment should, for it to be concluded, we need to update the PIA. Miss Annan, it is required but not legally required. I noted that out of the 13 government departments, there was a total lack of consequences. Well, they were informed, but I don't like the word penalties, but there were no clear consequences. I mean, no consequences equaling maybe the violations that were committed. This is not the case because the Privacy Commissioner did not find any violations. There was no violation of the law. So, well, I'm not going to waste my 30 seconds. So if the commissioner did not receive any complaints, it was because there was no violation. But you mentioned that he did not receive any complaints. The absence of complaints, it does not guarantee that there's total compliance. So I can explain in the sense that, well, at CRA, they mentioned that there was a PIA in place, and they mentioned that they were using these tools. I don't think it is a surprise that these tools are used, but we are not surprised. And we want to make sure that when people start using these kinds of tools, that they ensure that they update their PIAs. And in this case, we followed up immediately within a week. We followed up with questions to find out, do you have a PIA? Did you ask the right questions? And I could provide further details in writing if you so desire. Thank you, Mr. Wilmer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to committee, Ms. Annan. I've certainly had the pleasure of working with you on other committees, and I want to give you the opportunity to perhaps summarize, at least from my understanding, a couple of key questions as it relates to the testimony of previous witnesses before committee. It seems like there are some significant gaps in what the directives are and the mandate coming from the Treasury Board and how it's actually being implemented across the various departments and agencies. And so I believe in your remarks, you had mentioned there being some upcoming changes as it relates to the Treasury Board. So you're, as I'm to understand, embarking on modernizing your own department's adherence to PIAs. Is that correct?
We are offering and continuing to work on this revised directive on PIAs. We're going to update it. I'll be publishing it in the summer. What do we need to clarify? Maybe that was at the heart of your question. Well, we want to specify that if you change your software, for example, you're going to need a PIA going forward, that you can't rely on previous PIAs once new software or new tools are being used. Those are the types of clarifications we want to make. And again, in response to the previous question and this one, it is within Deputy Head's purview to make sure that they are enforcing every Treasury Board directive and policy and guideline, not only this one. And deputy heads actually have the ability to suspend, demote, and terminate if they find a violation of the law and Treasury Board policy. And this will continue to be the case, including with the updated PIA.
Thank you. And I do want to make note, this is a directive, correct, from the Treasury Board to ministries?
That's right.
And yet the culture was, the general, I'm going to say, the way that I viewed the testimony of many of them that came before this, is that they treated it as almost being optional. How, as the president of the Treasury Board, suffices to say you've already kind of delegated the authority to the ministries, but how do you, as the president of the Treasury Board, intend on ensuring that your directives are adhered to across the whole, range of departments and agencies?
I want to specify that PIAs are not mandatory. They are basically a checklist that deputy heads can go through to make sure that personal information is being protected. My role relates to the Privacy Act as a whole, and being the person responsible for the administration of the Privacy Act. That's going to include issuing policy requirements to which departments must adhere. And as I said,
Ms. Mann, respectfully, so it's not mandatory? So you're just suggesting that they do privacy assessments? It's not a directive, it's not within the mandate of departments to do this?
departments have to respect the Privacy Act. That's the role of all of us.
So
Make
are
sure
PIAs,
that personal information is protected.
are PIAs
I'll
part
ask,
of the
I'll
Privacy
ask,
Act?
I'll ask Dominic Rochon to.
I would prefer that you answer the questions.
Sure.
Is a PIA not included in the Privacy Act?
The PIA is not mandatory. It is part of the directive of the Treasury Board. The Privacy Commissioner provides advice and information to us
So when you
relating
send directives,
to
it's not mandatory? Help me understand that.
directives are mandatory, but it provides circumstances in which Treasury Board tools should be implemented. So every single item in the directive provides guidance to departments, and then departments can choose
I'm going to cut to the chase with 2 minutes left. We've worked together long enough to know that I'll cut right to the chase. I am watching with interest that it seems like in your reflections you're going to be modernizing it for the Treasury Board. We heard in testimony from departments that if it was mandatory, there'd be clearer guidelines. So let's just cut to the chase. Will you be making privacy impact assessments mandatory on a move forward basis to ensure that the privacy of both not just Canadians, but also those that are employed in the federal service are protected by not just directive, but by through mandatory privacy impact assessments. Are you going to legislate this and make it part of the regulation?
This is not legislation. PIA directive is through the Treasury Board.
Okay, we don't need to do
legislation.
semantics.
And I will say that we are in the midst of updating the directive. We are considering a number of avenues. Regardless, I expect compliance, and I will be reviewing the directive to ensure and strengthen this going
I just
forward.
need a straight answer from you, Ms. Anand.
We're in the process of updating it, and I'd be happy to come back and talk to you once this directive is updated.
You're the president of the Treasury Board. You can
Yes,
make
I
that
am.
statement right now and say, yes, we're committed to going forward so we don't end up back in this mess.
The Privacy Act is also looking at changes right now, so we are coordinating with Minister Varani and the Privacy Commissioner about how to ensure compliance occurs. Those discussions are ongoing.
have
It
you
is not
contemplated
my
making it
style
mandatory?
to rush into making major changes into the directive or suggesting such changes in the law, but we are taking
Okay.
our careful time to make sure that we get this right. And as I said, it's just a few months away, and we
I
will
have
be
another
issuing
2-minute
a
round. We're going to
revised
pick back up
directive.
on this
Okay.
conversation. I'd ask that you
Thank
not
you.
run
Thank
the
you.
clock out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Minister. That completes our first 6-minute rounds. Going to go for 5 minutes now. We've got Mr. Barrett, followed by Mr. Sabera. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please.
We've heard there are 635 IT middlemen that the Government of Canada does business with. Is that number correct?
There are a number of intermediaries.
What is the
very
number?
much, I would very much like clarification of the question, or if my CIO has anything he wants to add.
The question is very straightforward. We've seen, and I'm certain that you're aware of the issue of companies that are skimming 25 and 30% off multi-million-dollar government contracts, two-man operations like GC Strategies and Dalian, Cordex, the list goes on. We've heard the number is 635. Is that number correct? Companies like that.
Dominic?
I can only confirm that PSPC, I think, is the one that came up with this number. I'm not sure that's the specific number, so I can't confirm for sure.
What's the number you have, sir?
I don't have a number specifically on,
Okay,
on
so
that,
Minister-
but I do know that the OCG is doing a horizontal audit, which I think both ministers announced yesterday, looking into the issue, as well as PSPC.
So you don't know, Minister, is the answer.
I announced a horizontal audit yesterday, so I will find out.
The 3 companies identified for fraudulent billing yesterday, were they involved in ArriveCan?
And that is being run out of PSPC. I do not believe, but I cannot confirm, and I know that I'm under oath here, so I'm sorry that I cannot confirm that.
Do you know the names of the companies?
I do not.
How many more companies have been identified for fraudulent billing?
That
You
is
can
not
just leave your mic.
information.
They'll turn it on for you,
Sorry.
Minister.
That is not information that has come to me as president of the Treasury Board.
So you don't know. So yesterday's announcement said that was the first wave. That $5 million of fraud was just the first wave.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead on your point of order, Ms. Khalid.
I know that you've been very judicious in talking about relevance, but I do really question the relevance of this point of this line of questioning here, Chair.
Well, I'm going to allow Mr. Barrett to continue with the floor. I heard what Ms. Kuzi had to say, and I'm sure Mr. Barrett will bring it back to where he needs to go. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor. Go ahead, please. I did stop you.
We heard in yesterday's announcement that $5 million of corruption was just the first wave. So that implies that it being the first, that there's more to come. So how many more companies have been identified?
I think it's important to note that we are taking this extremely seriously, referring cases to the RCMP whenever fraud is uncovered, and that is exactly what we will continue to do. And I, as Treasury Board President, do not have the jurisdiction over the referral of those cases. I introduced the horizontal audit that we will be undertaking,
Minister,
an update to the manager's guide
you
and
said
the
that you take
conflict
it
of interest
seriously,
directive. Of
but
course I do.
you failed to take any action until the Liberal government has failed to take any action until they're dragged kicking and screaming by Conservatives to take action, and that's evidenced in the Arrive scam scandal. Why
Point of
did
order
you?
again, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
The topic of the day has to deal with the federal government's use of technological tools capable of extracting personal data from mobile devices and computers. I don't understand where Mr. Barrett is going. I know that you've allowed him some time to get to where he needs to go. I'd like to hurry him along there, Chair.
And he still has some time, and he has the floor. So I'm going to go back to Mr. Barrett. I stopped your time for 2 minutes, and you're at 2 minutes and 2 seconds. Mr. Barrett, go ahead.
I can only explain it to you. I can't understand it for you, Ms. Khalid. Ma'am.
Sorry, I'm not sure what that means, Chair.
Yeah, Ms. Khalid,
No, but if
Mr. Barrett-
if a
Mr.
member
Barrett
is going
has
to
the
speak to
floor.
me, then I would
Mr.
like to
Barrett has the
understand what he's
floor.
trying to say.
Mr. Barrett has the floor. I'm going to allow him to continue, and I hope that we're not interrupted. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Your Liberal government failed to take any action on ArriveCan until they were dragged kicking and screaming. We hear time and time again that you take it seriously, but you, Minister, voted against having the Auditor General investigate ArriveCan. Why?
Actually, we do take it very seriously. That's why I made a very extensive announcement yesterday with announcing the horizontal audit across government. I published a
we
new
heard that in your previous
guide
answer,
relating
Minister.
to the
Different question this
professional
time.
services.
November 2nd, 2022, you voted against the audit. Why?
Again, I take the issue extremely seriously, and
But
as
not
soon
seriously enough to have the Auditor General
as soon
investigate.
as I read the Auditor General's report,
That you
I
voted against.
got to work to make sure that
Point
we
of order,
have
Chair.
Mr. Barrett, I'm just going to ask that you allow the minister time to answer the question, if you
Thank
don't
you,
mind.
Mr. Chair.
Ms.
Thank
Dam-
you, Chair.
Ms.
Yes,
Damoff,
and
on your point.
that
go
was
ahead.
what, he's not allowing the minister to speak. If he's going to ask questions, it would be the polite thing to do to let her speak. And I think it's really rude of a member to call another member dumb in front of everyone. I think that was completely uncalled for earlier in the way he spoke to Mr.
I didn't hear
Khalid.
that language being used, Ms. Damoff, so.
It was pretty close, Chair.
Well, it wasn't used in the context in which you said it. Mr. Barrett, you have a minute. Continue, please.
Minister, you've demonstrated your your lack of seriousness on the issue by trying to shut down that Auditor General's report. And again, like I said, this is only when you're dragged kicking and screaming that you take action. Was there a privacy impact assessment done on the $60 million ArriveCan app?
I want to clarify that I respect the office of the AG extremely seriously. I have read her report.
It's a yes or no question.
I take this issue seriously,
Chair.
and that's why I made the announcement that I did yesterday.
So your defense, and again, you didn't answer the question. Your defense on the question of privacy impact assessments, and there having been no wrongdoing by your departments, is, well, there's been no investigations launched. Ma'am, there's over a dozen investigations that have been launched in your government's $60 million Arrive scam. Well, what does that tell you? If the absence of an investigation implies innocence, what do 12 investigations, what do you infer from that in the case of Arrive scam?
Very quick answer, please.
There was a PIA done on the application called ArriveCan.
Is there a delay between she seems to be answering my questions out of sequence, or we're missing them.
I can't determine that, Mr. Barrett. Thank you. Mr. Sabera, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister, to this committee. Just wanted to turn back to actually the motion at hand with regards to privacy and so forth, and the privacy risk assessment process. I will try, Chair, to stay on relevance in terms of what the motion speaks to and why the minister is here today. I think that is the job for all members of this committee. Minister, just a couple hopefully straightforward questions, and I'm sure they will be. In terms of the privacy risk assessment, privacy impact assessment, why is a privacy impact assessment so important for the employees that are onboarded on to the federal government?
It all goes back to the Privacy Act and making sure we're respecting personal information that is collected or intended to be collected in the interests of all public servants. That is the work that we need to do across government to protect personal information under the Privacy Act. We work closely with the Commissioner's office and making sure that our directives and our tools and guidelines are in respect at all times of the Privacy Act. I will say again, in this case, the Privacy Act and Commissioner did not find any violation of the legislation. And there were no complaints lodged and no investigations undertaken. And so what we can do from a Treasury Board perspective is examine that directive and strengthen it, which is exactly what I'm doing, and I will publish that in the summer.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. And I believe there's, on our side, there are 3 lawyers sitting on this committee, if I'm not mistaken, Anthony or Nekra. Oh, and I think Pam and I are the only ones that are non-lawyers. But there's a balance required in terms of the Privacy Act and these privacy impact assessments that are made by the government. Can you speak to the privacy? And before you answer that, Minister, you are prudently undertaking a spending review at Treasury Board, and I take it there is no impact on that side in terms of how the government views privacy and so forth, and if you can speak to the ongoing success or measures that with regards to your spending review.
Yes, there's no impact on the compliance with the Privacy Act, which we take very seriously. We are on track to save $15.8 billion over 5 years and $4.8 billion every year thereafter in the spending review. So we've done 2 stages of that spending review now, where I've tabled 2 tranches of results, and we will be continuing it as specified in the fall economic statement.
Okay, thank you. And Chair, I have another minute or 2, I think.
You have 2, Mr.
Okay.
Sabera.
Minister, after hearing what departments have said regarding the use of this software with regards to the privacy, do you have any concerns?
I think that we need to update our directive in order to ensure that departments are clear that when there's new software being used, that they need to do a PIA. I want to make sure that all measures are taken from a Treasury Board perspective to protect the personal information of public servants. Dom, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Minister. I think what I would say is, having heard from all the departments, having reached out to them and understood exactly how they're using these tools, nothing has come about that has caused us pause with regard to an impact on privacy. Why? Because they've been following strict guidelines, protocols with regard to the use. That being said, as a matter of course, we want to make it clearer that anyone else that wants to start to delve into the use of these types of tools, they should automatically think about doing a privacy impact assessment when they bring it into their activities and their programs.
Okay, can I quickly follow up with Mr. Rochon? Mr. Rochon, when there are issues of non-compliance, how is that generally handled?
So issues of non-compliance would require, so we would follow up, as we did in this case. If there is a question, we would follow up with a department or agency and delve into the matter as to whether or not a PIA was indeed required. If we're in disagreement with the department on the topic, what we can do is we can ask them to report on it through their annual report. Of course, there's also, with regard to compliance, the Privacy Commissioner can do the same in terms of following up, look into the matter, launch an investigation.
Merci, Monsieur Sabera, Monsieur Rochon. Nous sommes à l'heure.
Thank you, Mr. Rochon. I think we are just in time for the next round of questions. 2.5 minutes for Mr. Villemure, followed by Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes, Mr. Brock for 5 minutes, and Mr. Baines for 5 minutes, and we will conclude right on time. Mr. Villemure, 2 minutes and a half, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Anand, earlier on you mentioned that Treasury Board had a supervisory role and that you rely on the department ministers and other people to ensure the enforcement. I don't know that we want to summon all the ministers to appear here, but I have a direct question for you, and I'll try to, give you a timeline here. So an action happens. There's no PIA, and directive being misunderstood. There's no complaint at the commissioner's office, and there's no complaint. There's no investigation, no consequences. And if CBC Radio didn't publish that article, we would not be here. And I'm worried because we would have avoided all of this if and only if the PIA was included in the act. So are you, yes or no, going to include the PIA in the act? Please do not rehash the answers we heard earlier. Thank you. As I mentioned, I spoke with Minister Rani, and he is currently studying what the next steps would be with this bill. And at the same time, I will publish the other version of our directive. So this is a topic on which we are currently working. So you will publish in the summer a new directive. Will there be any legislative changes? Do you have any intent to propose legislative changes? Is this a possibility that's envisaged? Could this potentially happen? This is something that doesn't rest in my hands right now. It is not my decision. It is an issue to take up with Minister Virani. But of course, since like I already did this week, I've talked with him often, and I will mention the possibility and the necessary considerations with regard to this issue. Do you think that we should summon Minister Virani to explain this to us here? He is in charge of our position with regard to this bill, and he is currently studying this bill. This rests with the committee and not with me. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Mr. Villemere.
Ms. Annan, your mandate as the president of the Treasury Board is to provide oversight on administrative leadership and regulatory oversight. I'm concerned that you just won't come forward and at least, admit that there's a huge gap here. That's the purpose of why we're in this study. We have 13 departments and countless others, probably 120 plus others that are unknown in terms of whether or not they're effectively using privacy impact assessments. I want to know a little bit about your leadership, Ms. Annan. What action did you take upon learning through the media reports that 13 departments and agencies had not completed privacy impact assessments for the use of the personal data extraction tools? What did you do?
Immediately spoke with my team and was in touch with the department. That is how ministers are briefed to ensure that we are taking all actions necessary. You have heard that my department then reached out to all of the departments to hear exactly what they were doing. Now, 9 out of 13 of those departments have implemented PIAs, and we seek to ensure that compliance with privacy requirements occurs at all times. Yes, there is a problem. That's why the directive is being updated.
Ms. Annan, rather than reading your statement, what about the other agencies? Have you reached out to them? What have you done? You're the effective management board for the government. You're supposed to be providing oversight. You're supposed to establish policies and common standards for administrative personnel. This is your role. So how are you fulfilling it, and what assurances do we have that the other agencies and departments are in compliance? These are only 13 that got caught. We don't know about the other ones.
I am fulfilling my role, and I will assure you that we are in touch with departments regarding their compliance with Privacy Act and other Treasury Board policies. That's part of why I announced the horizontal audit yesterday.
I'll ask a direct question. Have you, to this date, been in direct contact with all departments and agencies regarding privacy impact assessments, particularly as it relates to the story that broke on the 13 departments? Have you reached out to everybody?
With our team through annual reporting. Dom, could you fulfill that?
Very quickly, because I'm respectful of your time. Departments and agencies are responsible for providing personal information banks for all their programs and activities.
Respectfully, sir, the question was to the president. The president did not answer it. It just was a simple, you just said, like, take responsibility as the president.
Yeah,
Did you
Mr. Green.
did you reach out to everybody, Anita? Yes or no? It's that simple. If it's no, then it's no.
Okay, Minister, quickly.
Yes, the department has been in contact. Thank you for the
Thank you, Mr.
question.
Wasn't that hard?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Brock for 5. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, privacy is extremely important to Canadians and public servants, but so is safeguarding the prudent use of taxpayer funds. Federal spending on outsourcing increased to $14.6 billion last year, which is 74% higher than when the Liberals under Justin Trudeau promised in 2015 to cut back on the use of external consultants. We now have evidence that the ArriveCan ballooned to at least $60 million. What you announced yesterday with your colleague, Minister Duclos, in my view, is only the tip of the iceberg, because Minister Duclos confirmed yesterday that the 3 companies in question that fraudulently billed taxpayers $5 million had nothing to do with ArriveCan, which brings into the broader question of that $14.6 billion in outsourcing. How many billions of dollars, how many millions of dollars more in fraudulent contracting schemes are out there? I know you talk about advanced data analytics, and this is how you uncovered the data. But the government always had this data capability. So the biggest problem that Canadians have with your government, Minister, is you're very reactive as opposed to proactive. One company alone had built 36 different federal departments, billing for the same hours in a given day. Why was that not detected in 2018 when they submitted their invoices with your advanced data analytics? Why wasn't that caught, Minister?
I want to specify that the Treasury Board did not have any involvement with the development of the ArriveCan Act.
I'm talking in a broader sense.
And
why wasn't the government able, with the capabilities of data analytics, to capture this in 2018 when it happened?
the app was built on an emergency basis under exceptional circumstances.
And the Auditor General basically said that a pandemic and the urgency does not mean you throw out the rules out the window. You had an obligation to safeguard taxpayer monies, and you abused that. You misused that. So what assurances do Canadians have that we're going to get to the bottom of the millions, if not billions of dollars?
Respecting.
Let me finish the question. What assurance can you give Canadians that you're going to actually follow up, you're going to identify these companies, you're going to refer it to the RCMP for possible investigation and criminal charges? What can you say about that?
I agree with the findings of the Auditor General's report. That is why I published yesterday an update to the Manager's Guide on Professional Services. I have also tabled through a series of estimates that we are reducing our reliance on outsourcing, including in the estimates prior to the holidays, $350 million in outsourcing contracts being reduced. Furthermore, reductions in the recent estimates that I have tabled to about $900 million in total. So we are working on continuing to reduce our reliance on outsourcing. That is something I take extremely seriously, and that's what I emphasized in my announcement yesterday.
Minister, your former role, one of your former roles, was Minister of Public Services and Procurement. You held that role from November the 20th, 2019 to October 26, 2021. I had before me the mandate letter that Justin Trudeau sent to you, and I'm going to read out various passages. I expect us to continue to raise the bar on openness, effectiveness, and transparency in government. It also means humility and continuing to acknowledge mistakes when we make them. Canadians do not expect us to be perfect. They expect us to be diligent, honest, open, and sincere in our efforts to serve the public interest. Your leader, Justin Trudeau, has been anything but apologetic. So I'm going to give you the opportunity, Minister. It's plainly obvious to Canadians that that wasted $60 million on an app that was very ineffective, that didn't save one Canadian life, that is now subject to numerous RCMP investigations. Are you prepared to admit your role? Because during the rollout of 177 different versions of the app, you were the minister. Are you prepared here and now to apologize to Canadians for the lack of ministerial oversight? Yes or no?
I was not the minister. The app was developed at CBSA. I was the Minister of Procurement. My mandate was vaccines and PPE.
You were still part of that according to the Auditor General. Are you prepared to apologize to Canadians?
I was not the minister.
Are you prepared to apologize to Canadians?
Thank you, Mr. Brock. That concludes your time. I appreciate
that. Is
appreciate that.
Incorrect.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Baines, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, did you have anything to add there at the end there? I think you were trying to.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yesterday at committee and again today, false allegations being thrown at a fellow member of Parliament and Minister of the Crown. I find that surprising, and I think that all members of the House of Commons need to deal in facts rather than conjecture and false allegations. So I do take issue with the way in which language is being abused in this committee and again yesterday.
Thank you for clarifying there. And thank you for joining us today. I want to just go back to the issues of non-compliance that came to light. How are they generally handled? How are these issues handled?
Again, the deputy heads of each department, that's the deputy ministers or the heads of organizations, are responsible for compliance with TBS guidelines, policies, and directives. And we, as the Treasury Board, make sure that we are in touch with departments to ensure that compliance. Dom, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Minister. So as I think I mentioned in one of the earlier answers, if there's an instance of non-compliance, either found by the Privacy Commissioner or by us, there can be inquiries done, questions asked, requirements for a department or an agency to report further on mitigating factors in their annual report to follow up on that. And in extreme cases, there can be revocation of delegated authority, but I'm not aware of ever getting to that point.
Okay, so it's extremely important to have funding for, say, officers of the Parliament to do this work and hold government to account, ensure the trust is in our institutions, and the Office of the Auditor General is a prime example of this. And during the first year of the Harper government, the budget for this office was $78.6 million, and during the last year, it was only $81 million, and the current leader of the opposition was the minister responsible for safeguarding our democracy, and he did not ensure that officers of the Parliament were funding adequately. Can you explain to the committee your thoughts about ensuring adequate funding to these institutions and how that's being taken into consideration now?
Sure. Obviously, even through the spending review, what we are aiming to do is to not reduce funding to key organizations, especially where that would impact services to Canadians and the protection of Canadians' interests. So obviously, we take the protection of personal information extremely seriously, and I do as minister as well. And I will say, referring back to my colleague's question, if he had analyzed my role, he would see that I signed no contract relating to ArriveCan, and he would also see in the Auditor General's report that the Auditor General highlighted CBSA, which is a organization within the Department of Public Safety, of which I was not the minister. So once again, I think it's important to hold government to account, but while doing so, to speak with truth and professionalism rather than false allegations and conjecture.
Okay, and just on the analytics and finding, looking into the issues of non-compliance and having the ability to modernize new tools to get to the root of some of these non-compliance issues, like how current are these tools, and when were they brought into the use of government use?
Maybe I'll try to quickly answer that question. I don't believe we're in a situation of non-compliance. We are in a situation of interpretation of the rules, and I think that is where the minister